The Insurance Brokers Podcast is brought to you by Sarah Myerscough of Boston Tullis.
Welcome to the Insurance Brokers Podcast with your host, Sarah Myerscough. This business podcast is for ambitious brokers determined to grow their business. Our guests are highly experienced industry experts and innovators. This is the place to leverage their success, learn how to break through barriers to growth, and discover a community of support and ideas whilst growing your business.
Good morning, Steve. I'm so grateful to have you here on the Insurance Brokers Podcast. I know you're a very busy man and lots going on at BIBA at the moment, so I'm really grateful for your time. Thank you for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here, Sarah. Thanks for the invite.
So I think one of my previous podcasts, we started talking a little bit about BIBA and the importance of BIBA to the independent broker. And I know that sort of 80% of your membership base are sort of smaller independent brokers. So that really is the topic for today. So I wonder if I can, not that you need an introduction because I'm sure everybody knows who you are, but I wonder if you want to give us a bit of background about who is Steve.
Steve has been at BIBA since the spring of 2004. I was recruited from within the FCA, where I'd spent a couple of years. I'd spent a couple of years prior to that with the General Insurance Standards Council. But before that, just 21 years with the Orion Insurance Company, a broker-only insurer. So I joined BIBA to head up their compliance operation some 9 months before FCA, or FSA as it was then, Sarah, launched. I fulfilled the compliance role until the spring of 2013 when I was promoted into the Chief Exec's chair. So I've been doing the Chief Exec role now for just over 8 years.
That's incredible. And what have you seen in the last 8 years in terms of market changes, in terms of BIBA's development and I suppose the marketplace in terms of how many independent brokers there are still left out there?
The market has changed quite significantly. What we never had prior to the FCA or FSA as it was back in 2005 was a definitive list of how many brokers there were. And of course the FSA doesn't make it any easier because the word broker doesn't appear in FSA or FCA rules or the glossary. They regulate by activity type, not by what the firm is. So we've never had a definitive handle on how many of us there are, but we all have a sense that there aren't as many of us now as there were back in 2004 to 2005. But I think what it has done from a regulatory point of view is sharpen firms up. I think firms are now much clearer in terms of their own processes and procedures. Things are done deliberately rather than, you might say, by osmosis. So we have that. We have a regulatory architecture that is overburdensome. The regulator was built in the year 2000 under the Labour government to regulate the major institutions. And here we are, 20 years on from that piece of legislation, and the architecture of the regulator is still designed around the institutions. They still haven't got to grips with how to appropriately and proportionately regulate a plethora of smaller insurance brokers, mortgage brokers, IFAs, etc. So we're all in this very large sausage machine, and we're faced with a regulatory architecture that is, as I say, overburdensome. You can compare this to what our peer brokers are faced around the rest of Europe. They have a much lighter touch, and we're not calling for a light touch. What we want is the right touch. We want a more proportionate approach to regulation. I'm sure we'll come on to some regulatory type questions further on in this podcast, Sarah.
Yeah, absolutely. What if you went back into the FCA now and you were tasked with making that the right touch? What would it look like for you?
That's a very difficult question because the regulator's hands are somewhat tied by the legislation that underlies it. Don't think we can go back to a plethora of different regulators, which is what the Labour government were faced with back in the late 1990s when they pulled it all together into what they called the super regulator.
You're talking to an ex-immigration lawyer, so regulation legal changes and legislation is something that was played a big part of my past life, and it's quite a difficult one to answer because of how interrelated everything is.
Exactly right. And there's been some what you might call rather naive criticism of Europe for putting these rules upon us. It's not the case. The UK has a absolute thirst for regulation and policing regulations that's pretty well unequaled anywhere in Europe. There's an analogy we use of, and I'm sure I haven't got the type of this directive correctly, but it was you might call the Clean Beaches Directive, where European countries had to go and inspect their beaches and put blue flags on them if they met the standards. When you contrast the UK and the French approach, the UK's issued a whole set of rules and appointed a whole load of inspectors. The French just produced blue flags. I'm not suggesting that we take exactly the French route, but it does demonstrate the different approach and the almost overzealous approach that the UK has to regulation, typified by Treasury's decision back in 2001 to simply put the responsibility for the implementation of the Insurance Distribution Directive, or the Insurance Mediation Directive as it was back in 2001. I think they took a 30-second decision, we'll just give that to the FSA. Whereas the Germans got criticised for implementing that directive late. What the Germans did was take a good look around at what the regulatory architecture had, what they had, what they thought they needed, and built something that was much more appropriate to the sort of firms that were going to be caught by it. And that, I think, would have been then a better approach.
Some of the problem is in the sort of fast, I don't want to call it a knee-jerk approach, but almost a knee-jerk approach to crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's. Unpicking that years later actually takes so much more resource and pain than taking that bit of time at the beginning.
It does, Sarah, and we often hear from politicians, okay, well, tell us what rules you would like disapplied. Well, it's not as simple as that. It's the overall approach. It's the overall approach that needs to be looked at again.
We work quite closely with a company called RR Compliance, and they, funnily enough, are compliance specialists, and Roland, who's the MD, sits on the, I think it's the APCC. Apologies, Roland, if you're listening and I got that wrong. And it's some of the, it's sort of, they're often getting together and people coming in, putting their two pence in about what needs to change and just understanding what the rules are and what needs to come out of it. And I don't think the media help when they sort of jump in with their hype on and sort of skewed perceptions on some of the changes, or obviously the BI stuff that's been in the news a lot over the last 18 months. And I think they can sort of add to that distorted view, like you said, the idea that the Europeans have imposed this on us.
Yeah, that's right.
It's crazy. So from an independent broker's perspective, do you guys provide support and advice in terms of understanding all the regulatory changes and compliance, or is that something that they go elsewhere for?
Yeah, we're very active in the compliance space. David Sparks, who's an ex-FSA supervisor, heads the compliance activities at BIBA. We have, since my time in that seat, run regional compliance forums all around the UK. And they're great on a number of fronts. It gives compliance staff who are often quite isolated within their business, often referred to as the business prevention officer, rather cruelly. It gives them a chance to mix with fellow compliance officers in a non-competitive environment and share approaches. So, we tackle it this way. Well, we've done it that way. Well, there's a good bit of learning there. But more importantly, it does give firms the chance to hear what's coming down the tracks. And that's what makes us different to compliance consultants. Compliance consultants are excellent at applying the current rules. What we have access to is what's coming down the tracks. We've worked very, very hard and very closely within the European structure in our time before Brexit. So we were well aware of what was coming down the tracks, and more importantly, why was it coming down the tracks? And we have a very good and open relationship with the FCA, so we're able to take FCA people out and around the country on our compliance forums, so they can explain to our independent brokers what's coming, and gives our independent brokers a chance to challenge them and say, well, if you do that, it means this. and that putting that into the mix when you're formulating policy and for us formulating responses to FCA proposals is really, really helpful for all parties.
Absolutely, and I, excuse me, I was having a look at your sort of the spread of events that you guys offer, from webinars, well, mainly webinars at the moment, on all different topics, and I saw a couple, knowledge shares in different regions, and I think that's really important. And one of the podcasts I did recently, I'm trying to think who it was with, was talking about independent brokers, and actually if they were to band together more and have a more collaborative approach, which really is facilitated by what you guys are doing in these regional knowledge sharing sessions, then that would be overall a much more beneficial sort of environment to progress over the next 3-5 years.
Well, that's what BIBA's main aim in life is to be. Now, our members are a very broad church of firms. They range from the very largest firms, so your Marshes, Willis's and Aons, through to most of the very well-known large personal lines brands, and then into a plethora of smaller independent brokers all up and down the country. 80% of our members have 20 or less staff, so we are well placed in the independent broker space. And that's reflected within our governance structure. We have 5 advisory boards that reflect that diversity of membership, and one of those is our smaller, an SME broker advisory board. Each of our 5 advisory boards has a chair, and those chairs sit on the main BIBA board. But to reflect the fact that the smaller brokers are the majority by headcount, both the chair and the deputy chair of that advisory board sit on the main board. So our SME broker board is chaired by Paul Dixon from the Watford area, and Karen Weir from the North East is his deputy. And both Paul and Karen sit on the main BIBA board. So independent brokers, small independent brokers, have a really very large voice within the association's governance.
I think that's really interesting. I did a podcast with somebody else, and we were talking about the independent broker's voice, and BIBA did crop up in that conversation, and I think the conversation was generally around what more could BIBA be doing, and the suggestion was that it's the bigger brokers on the BIBA panel, which obviously is not the case, which is fabulous. What and forgive me for my ignorance, although I do know because I've done the research, but I want you to tell me, what are the main areas that you support independent brokers with, and how does that manifest itself? And also, is it an opt-in? Do they need to engage with BIBA, or is BIBA sort of front and face going, hello, let me help you with this? How do you get around that?
There has to be an element of put your hand up and come and participate. It's a bit like the kids going swimming on a Saturday. You can either be in the water swimming up and down the pool, or you can be sat on the side with just dipping your toes in. And we do say to people, look, don't just join in. So we have 12 regional committees, and brokers around the country can engage with us regionally. On that basis, we take the compliance forums around each of the regions, albeit they're virtual this year, but they have been physical in the past, and they will be physical again in the future. So come and join in with those. In terms of the support that we give, we've spoken about regulation, technical support. So my technical team have never been busier throughout the pandemic. They were fielding questions on BI cover, on the hard market, on brokers' own EI. There's a wealth of expertise that we have within the business, or that we have access to from within the business. We have a standards committee that produce a good practice guides that are all over our website. We produce a weekly email that tells members exactly what we're doing and how to interact with us. We run the biggest broking conference in the world now. There's a variety of touch points. Plus we have area managers that are available around the country that brokers can tap into. The world that we're in means you need to reach out. Yeah.
Some of the best advice I got when I started Boston Tullis was from Kevin Hancock. And he said to me, you've got to get involved and give back, and you will find that opportunities present themselves. But you've got to get stuck into the community. And I, shortly after that, joined the Cambridge CII as their education secretary, and this year I'm doing the deputy president and education secretary role, and it's been phenomenal. The people I've met, the sort of engagement, even through COVID, has been so incredible for me, and it's on the agenda eventually for us to join BIBA. So I think it's a fabulous thing to do, and also quite a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, the world that we're in, there's a whole raft of knowledge there that you can go and seek. So the internet, for example, you have to go on it to find it. But when you are on it, you do find it. And it's a little bit like that with life now. As you so eloquently said, if you reach out, it's there for you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So where do you see, okay, no, different question. Do you offer sales training, marketing support, that type of support to brokers?
We run a whole series of webinars, as you alluded to earlier. They are on a variety of topics. Some of them are of that ilk, others are more technical by their nature.
The reason I ask, obviously, video production marketing is what we do, and we do that for brokers and insurers. And lots of the conversations I've been having are around the almost cliche saying of, buyer behavior's changing, the sales cycle's changing, we're going into a hardening market, you've got to change what you're doing. If you do what you've always done, you'll get where you've always got. That's not the case anymore, blah, blah, blah. And all of this stuff, the sort of rhetoric that probably hasn't changed that much in the last 20 years, and yet we're still here, still plodding along, doing what we're doing. But some of the conversations I'm having now is that COVID has actually turned that on its head. And not just COVID. The market was changing prior to COVID, and COVID just hasn't helped. So what I'm interested in, I suppose, is what you see the next 5 years being, and what brokers should be doing. Is there actually coming a change in terms of having to be more digitally present? What do you think about that? It's all very good me saying it. That's what I do for a job. So you're more independent. What do you think?
Well, I think you're right to suggest that COVID is going to make for a number of changes. It's making changes to the way in which people work and the way people live their lives and the way people view that balance between working and living. What we're seeing from the COVID BI cases is a clear example of customers not really understanding what it is that they're buying, and therein lies a real opportunity for independent brokers to be that point of, let's explain to you what it is that you're buying. Let's work out exactly what you need and what you want. Let's see if we can better align those wants and needs to what might have happened in the past. So a real opportunity there in the advice space for independent brokers, I think. I think we will see a move to clearer language being used. I think we all recognise that that's fundamentally important. We've seen during the lockdown a dramatic move to online purchasing. You can't move in the streets now for DPD and Hermes vans delivering things all over the place. And don't get started on Amazon and Sainsbury's. And therein lies a real dilemma, doesn't it? Because people have dramatically changed their buying habits. And if they can change their buying habits from going to Sainsbury's once a week to having it delivered once a week, they'll expect the same on their financial services. I've spoken to several larger brokers in the personal line space who tell me that move back in March 2020 from having call centres to having everybody working at home with laptops was not part of a longer term digital strategy. It was a reaction to what was going on. So they're now looking at it and saying, do we want to get back onto the original path we had for our digital strategy, or are we going to move our digital strategy from where we have morphed to into something else? And they're doing that at a time when customers are now starting to demand digital service, because that's what they're used to with everything else that they're getting. So we have that challenge. But look, there's always going to be a role for advice. We sell peace of mind, and there will always be a constituent that wants the peace of mind from a personal perspective rather than a digital perspective. So there's always going to be that balance, and that's what I think a lot of independent brokers will be wrestling with over the next 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, and it's not an easy wrestle. It's not an easy wrestle at all. Some of the things that we do are around, as you know, podcasting, because that's what we're doing right now, and sort of the videos that you can take to go, excuse me, with that, and tiny little info clips that could be of value to insurance brokers in this case. And we've got a couple of clients that are doing it very very effectively in their own niches. So they will interview their specific niche, whoever that might be, and then chop up the videos to provide sort of personal video advice through an email campaign. And we're seeing quite a lot of good response from that. But there is this whole issue of turning that interest into an opportunity, and that can only really be done in I say face-to-face, I'm meaning virtual face-to-face as well now, because of the world we live in. And sometimes I think that's quite a difficult bridge to gap to bridge to gap. You know what I'm trying to say?
Gap to bridge, I think. Yeah, look, and you're right. Certainly in the anything beyond micro SME, it's difficult to get two risks that are identical. So that personal interaction, you've got to make sure you're putting a square peg in a square hole.
Absolutely. What do you think about?
Sorry, I was going to say the only way you can establish whether it is a square peg is to make sure it's a square peg, and rather rely on a digital solution to find that for you, as you alluded to there, Sarah. I think the personal interaction to establish that is probably still the best way.
Yeah, I think so. And I think what's coming is sort of a hybrid approach. And that for me is where sales and marketing integrate. That's it. And when you've got a properly integrated strategy and you've decided this is who I want my clients to be, this pool of prospects, this is what I know they need to know, so I'm going to start telling them that, and then I'm going to phone them, and then I'm going to, that's kind of the integration, which sometimes it sounds so simple when you say it. It's actually quite difficult to do when you're reactive in working in the business. Just on a slight side note, one of the things that one of the podcasts that I did, and one of the interests I've got is Sian's women's financial expectation, and the work she's done around the different pivotal points within your life where you can make a decision that will impact the sort of your financial freedom or independence or circumstances later on in life.
Yeah, we work very, very closely with Sian. You're right, Sian has taken the lead on a number of those issues. The issue where we've taken more of the lead is in the mental well-being space, where we identified quite a while ago that there was a developing issue. We put our own staff through mental health first aid training on a voluntary basis, and a third of the BIBA staff put their hands up and said, yes, I'd like that, myself included. We also provided that mental health first aid training at a heavily subsidised cost around our regions in late 2019 and in the first couple of weeks of 2020, and got some fabulous feedback. We use a firm called Mental Health in Business, and it's Claire Russell's business. I think Claire's very well known in the space now.
Yeah.
She was a speaker at our Manchester regional dinner in February 2020. It's not the last physical event we did before lockdown, and uniquely at a regional dinner, she got a standing ovation at the end for her after dinner speech, which is
that's incredible.
Something else. She was also a seminar speaker at our 2021 conference back in May. So a really topical subject. We get a huge amount of website activity on anything we post in the mental well-being space. But to go back to your question around some of the D&I activity that Sean is doing. Yeah, we support it, we follow it, we signpost our members to it. We get quite a few questions on the subject, and I'll repeat a line that I used after Claire's piece at conference. We get a few people saying, I get the diversity bit, but what does the inclusion bit mean? And one of our younger brokers used a perfect analogy to summarize the difference, in that diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusion is being asked to dance. Once you get that into your head, it's clear.
Yeah, I think that's a really good analogy. It's really interesting what you're saying about sort of D&I, but also mental health well-being. That sort of all part of a larger group. And Claire's done some TED Talks, hasn't she? And I think she's a fabulous speaker. And total side note, but one of the things that we did in June last year with the CII was some mental health webinars, and we called them Coffee, Calm and Connection, and it was myself and a mental health practitioner, and we did a little bit of sort of psychoeducation around a topic. It might be burnout, it might be anxiety, it might be stress, it might be loneliness. And we did a few sort of short meditations and some psychoeducation around it, and it went down really, really well. We got some fabulous feedback, and we did it every Friday through June. And one of the things that happened during one of those webinars, there was somebody on it, and we broke off into some small group chats as well for a bit of sort of social interaction. And there was a lady on it, and I happened to be in her small group, and she was so grateful to have an opportunity to talk to people, and she was close to tears. And she said through the lockdown she's been on her own, living in chronic pain with various sort of physical disability, not a lot of support from the employer, and she was, the gratitude at having someone to talk to was a little bit overwhelming. And I said to Zoe, who we did these sessions with, let's do them throughout June, and then the CII asked us to do them from September through to October. And we're actually in the process now of developing an app that takes this, the Coffee Calm Connection principle, and puts it into short 5-minute boosts for busy professionals with a community which supports people. And we're talking to the CII about it in terms of piloting it in the latter half of this year, so that we can get the content really spot on. So Claire is actually on my hit list to see if she'll do a podcast with me, because I watch a lot of her stuff, and I think she's a really inspirational individual. So it's interesting, how she's managed to sort of build mental health in business, and I think she's a really phenomenal woman.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with any of that. It's a subject that got no airtime 5 years ago, but we all have physical health, and we all have mental health. We can be physically well or physically unwell. We can be mentally well or mentally unwell. We do need to think of them collectively, and I think that has definitely not just started to happen, but it is now happening. And sorry, Sarah, go on.
I was just going to say, one of the things that particularly impressed me about Claire, and one of the really powerful things that I want for Coffee Calm Connection, is this idea of ownership, because I do think the mental health movement has quite a lot of assumed victimization with it, and I think there needs to be both an understanding and empathy towards mental health, as there does with physical health, but also this idea that, so what can you do now? Put it back in your control. What can I do to help? But what can you do to help to move from where you are now to this place, as you would with a broken leg, or a cold? It might be you need to go to bed for 3 days. You might need to take some paracetamol, whatever it might be. So some of the stuff that Claire talks about is that ownership, and I really like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's patently obvious if you've got a broken leg to all who are looking at you that you have. You're not as physically well as you could be, but it's not quite so obvious in the mental health space. And that of itself is an issue for us as employers, in that we have obligations under health and safety legislation for the well-being of our staff wherever they're working. And if you've got staff at home that you haven't seen for months and months, how do you know they're getting on with regards to their mental well-being. So it's causing the subject to raise right up almost to the top of the radar for a lot of employers now, which is, and I repeat, everything we put on the website with regards to the subject gets a huge amount of traffic. So it's clearly very, very topical.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think it's a definitely sort of a worldwide agenda, particularly at the moment, and it's great to see it becoming the top of agenda with organisations like yourselves, which filters through to an entire industry in the UK, which I think is absolutely phenomenal. On the sort of, I know I've taken up quite a bit of your time this morning, but I've really enjoyed chatting to you. I wonder if we can finish with just maybe your advice on what's coming, and what, if you are an independent broker, aside obviously from A, joining BIBA if you're not a member, and B, engaging with BIBA in every way you can if you are, what your advice to the broking community is.
I think the main top areas of advice are probably where we have already been with this conversation. It's keep listening to your customers. Make sure you are understanding what it is that they are wanting. Make sure you're understanding what you're providing for them, and try and make sure that the customers understand what it is that they have entered into. And in terms of BIBA, come on board. And the trade association is only as good and as strong as the quality and quantity of engagement that we get from our members. We have over 1,800 corporate entities now that are BIBA members. The more that we have, the stronger our voice is with government, with the regulator, with the broader stakeholders. And as we said, don't just join in, get yourself involved. There's lots and lots of different touch points within BIBA that you can get involved with and benefit from. And if you benefit from it, we benefit from it, and we collectively benefit from it.
I think that's really, really great note to end on. It will be a fabulous clip, and I'd like to thank you very much for your time, Steve.
My pleasure, Sarah. Thanks again for the invite.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you have enjoyed what you have heard, have any questions or feedback, please leave us a review and we will be sure to get back to you. If you would like further information on how Boston Tullis Group can support your business, or if you would like to join us on an episode, please do not hesitate to contact us.